Good evening. Tonight I'm going to start reading to you Sid Fleshman and his book, The Whipping Boy, which is one of my favorite stories. My mom introduced me to this when I was just a kid, and I have read it so many times that, as you'll see as we go through this, the pages are actually falling out. But if you like adventure and friendship and scalawags and dancing bears, then this book is for you. And so I'll read you about a chapter a night, and you can tune in. So let's begin. Sid Fleshman, The Whipping Boy. Chapter 1, in which we observe a hair-raising event. The young prince was known here and there, and just about everywhere else, as Prince Brat. Not even black cats would cross his path. One night, the king was holding a grand feast. Sneaking around behind the lords and ladies, Prince Brat tied their powdered wigs to the backs of their oak chairs. Then he hid behind a footman to wait. When the guests stood up to toast their king, their wigs came flying off. The lords clasped their bare heads as if they'd been scalped. The ladies shrieked. Prince Brat, he was never called that to his face, of course, tried to keep from laughing. He clapped both hands over his mouth, but out it ripped, a cackle of ha-has and hee-haws and hee-hee-hees. The king spied him and looked mad enough to spit ink. He gave a furious shout. "Fetch the whipping boy," he yelled. Prince Brat knew that he had nothing to fear. He had never been spanked in his life. He was a prince, and it was forbidden to spank, thrash, cuff, smack, or whip a prince. A common boy was kept in the castle to be punished in his place. "Fetch the whipping boy," the king yelled again. The king's command traveled like an echo from guard to guard up the stone stairway to a small chamber in a drafty north tower. An orphan boy named Jemmy, the son of a rat catcher, roused from his sleep. He'd been dreaming happily of his ragged but carefree life before he'd been plucked from the streets and sewers of the city to serve as royal whipping boy. A guard shook him fully awake. "On your feet, me boy." Jimmy's eyes blazed up. "Ain't I already been whipped twice today? God, what's the prince done now?" "Let's not keep the great folks waiting, lad." In the main hall, the king said, "20 whacks." Defiantly biting back every yelp and cry, the whipping boy received the 20 whacks. Then the king turned to the prince, "And let that be a lesson to you." "Yes, Papa." The prince lowered his head as to appear humbled and contrite. But all the while he was feeling a growing exasperation with his whipping boy. In the tower chamber, the prince fixed him with a scowl. "You're the worst whipping boy I ever had. How come you never bawl?" "Dunno," said Jemmy with a shrug. "A whipping boy is supposed to yowl like a stuck pig. We dress you up fancy and feed you royal, don't we? It's no fun if you don't bawl." Jemmy shrugged again. He was determined never to spring a tear for the prince to gloat over. "Yelp and bellow next time, you hear? Or I'll tell Papa to give you back your rags and kick you back into the streets." Jemmy's spirits soared. "Much obliged, your royal awfulness," he thought, "much obliged. I'll take me rags, and I'll be gone in half a blink of an eye." Chapter 2, wherein the prince cannot write his name. Jemmy could count on a thrashing first thing in the morning. Sure and certain, he thought, as he pulled on his fine velvet breeches and silk stockings. The prince wouldn't know his lessons. The royal tutor was quick as a fly swatter with his willow switch, and Jemmy would be back in rags. "Take a last look at me, Pa, and rest your bones," he muttered to himself. "Did you ever think I'd be holed up in the king's own castle, all rigged up in duds that would shame a peacock? Reckon I'll fetch a pair of sharp-toothed ferrets and go to rat catching, same as you. Same as you, Pa." The tutor, Master Peckwitt, was a round-faced man with fat cheeks. He pointed his switch at the prince. "You fiddle-fat old scholar," he bellowed. "One day you'll be king, and you still don't know your alphabet from pig tracks." The prince snapped his fingers. "I can always get someone to read for me." "You ain't so much as write your name." "Pish posh, I can always get someone to write my name for me." The tutor's cheeks, swelling with anger, almost unhorsed the small spectacles saddling his nose. "It would be easier to educate a boiled cabbage. Prepare to be punished, your lordship." 10 whacks at least," said the prince, "and good and hard, if you please." Jemmy, who was obliged to be close at hand for the daily lessons, reckoned that freedom was now close at hand. The prince threw him a smirking glance as Master Peckwood raised the switch and beat the whipping boy like a carpet. Jemmy didn't bawl, he didn't yelp or bellow. 10 whacks, and not a sound escaped his lips. "You contrary rascal," the prince exploded. "I'm on to you, Jemmy from the streets. It's pure spite that you won't howl. Think you can cross me and get away with it? Ha! Never and no how." God, thought Jemmy, he's going back on his word. "And don't try to run away. I'll have you tracked down till your tongue hangs out like a red flag." And so it went on for more than a year. The prince learned nothing. The whipping boy learned to read, write, and do sums. Chapter 3. The Runaways. On a night when the moon gazed down like an evil eye, the young prince appeared in Jemmy's chamber. "Boy, tumble out of bed. I need a manservant." Jemmy saw that the prince was wearing a black cloak and carrying a wicker basket the size of a sea chest. "What are you up to now? Walking in your royal sleep, are you?" "I'm running away." The whipping boy sat bolt upright. Hardly a day had passed that he didn't make one plan or another to run off. But a prince? What horrible new mischief was this? "You can't hop off like you was common folks. What's biting you?" Said the prince, "I'm bored." "With dumping bullfrogs in the moat so no one can get a week of sleep?" Boring. "And didn't you laugh fit to kill when the knights slipped off their horses and clattered to the ground because you had hog greased the saddles?" The prince folded his arms. Boring. "And don't you get me thrashed so that this hide o' mine feels like the devil run me over with spikes in his shoes?" "Let's be off," said the prince. Why me, Jemmy thought. Can't you find a friend to run off with? But no, not you, Prince Brat. You've got no friends. That's why me. Jemmy pointed to the window. "It's night out," he protested. "The best time," replied the prince. "But ain't you afraid of the dark? Everyone knows that. You won't even sleep without a lit candle." "Lies. Anyway, the moon's up, good and bright. Come on." Jemmy stared at him with dreadful astonishment. "The king will have a gory-eyed fit." Positively. "He'll hunt us down. You'll get off light as a feather, but I'll be lucky if they don't whip me to the bone. More likely I'll be hung from the gallows. Scrag for sure." "Your lookout," said the prince with a dry grin. "Carry the basket, Jemmy from the streets, and follow me." Chapter 4. Containing Hands in the Fog. The night moon had lit their way like a lantern, but by dawn the runaways, double mounted on a horse from the castle stable, were hopelessly lost. A thick fog had swirled in, they strayed from the road, and the trees had closed in on them. "Forest is creepy things," said Jemmy, hanging onto the basket as best he could. "Gimme cobbled streets any time." A low branch almost swept them off the saddle. "Boys," said the prince, "get down and lead this dumb-headed beast." "Lead it? In this fog? I need 2 hands and a lantern to find my own nose." But Jemmy slipped off the saddle. A plan had been tumbling out in his head. "Here's your chance, Jemmy," he told himself. "Slip away in the fog. Run for it. No more whippings for you, not if you can't be found. The great sewers, Jemmy, that's the place to hide." "What's keeping you?" asked the prince. "Grab the halter." "I'm thinking." Leaves crackled under Jemmy's feet as he began to back off. His mind was made up. Once the fog cleared, he'd find the river. Hat in his paw taught him that his way through the maze of mighty brick sewers was to find the river and navigate that. That's where they'd caught the fierce rats and sold them by the cageful. The dog and rat pits paid fancy prices for best fighters, and that meant sewer rats. Who'd think to look for Jemmy under the city? Jemmy took another crackling step backward and froze. A sudden yellow glow floated in the fog. The prince burst into squawks and bellows. "Who's there? Let go! Take your hands off me, you insolent rascal!" There came a rough, booming reply. "Well, what we got here?" The glowing lantern swayed. "A noisy brat on a fine beast of horse." Jemmy edged closer. A cutthroat, he thought. Like a snake striking, a ghostly hand darted through the fog and clutched his arm. A second cutthroat. Jemmy looked up and barely made out a long, bony face with hollow cheeks and a nose like a meat cleaver. "I got another, Billy," cackled the second man, shoving Jemmy forward. And tune in tomorrow when we start Chapter 5, Hold Your Nose, Billy, and Cutwater. Thank you for tuning in.